Hey guys, Santoli here with Matt, who went 6-2 at the Toronto Regions with Enneacraft. This is a deck he's been piloting for a while now, just because it's a different play style. And I'm mainly bringing this profile, not necessarily just to show off the deck, but to kind of give you guys information on it, because I think a lot of good players have a bad reputation towards this deck, or bad opinion on this deck, where it's just something weird that you shouldn't learn. And I think that's just a horrible way of approaching understanding the deck. Even if you don't love the deck, even if you don't want to play it, that's fine. But it is by all means a solid deck, and just because it has a different play style doesn't mean that it's something you can just ignore. I think it was Jesse said to me once that people really hate playing against decks that force people to play differently, and that's this deck. Just because it plays differently doesn't mean it's not viable. It's no different than playing against something like Flu or some trap decks that just set 5 and you have to have a grinding game like that, playing through floodgates. Maybe it's not the most enjoyable for you, but it's a completely valid strategy in the game, and I think it's very important for you guys to learn how to play against it. So we're going to go through the deck profile first. We're also going to talk about how to beat it, its meta matchups, and I'm not overly familiar with the deck either, so I'll let Matt take it away from here. Thanks for being on here as well.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so I finished, I think it was 22nd at the Toronto Regional, which was last Saturday. I played Enneacraft. I think this deck is it's okay. It has a really good Cool Tune matchup specifically, which I really did appreciate since I played 3 Cool Tune in my 8 rounds. But it has some very, very big fundamental issues in terms of how the deck actually operates. I think that kind of keeps it from being like a top deck. And I think one of the big things that a lot of people don't realize is that if you know what all the cards do, the matchup gets a lot easier. Most of my matchups were just because my opponents would play into cards they didn't know existed. And the thing with this deck is that when you play into specific cards that like especially the big guys, you do just kind of win the game on the spot. Unfortunately, cards like Spia, cards like Pixie are just extremely evil floodgates that you have to kind of play in a weird way to beat. And if you do kind of, it's kind of weird to say, but if you play it slow, it's a lot easier to just kind of manage. I'll just get into the profile real quick. So I played 3 of the most important uh, searchers. So that's these 4. This one is good into branded because it lets you shuffle 3 cards from your opponent's grave into the deck. But for the most part, the blue one is going to be on most people's end boards because it triggers when any card is activated that would special summon. And the important thing with the Anycraft cards is that because they trigger as mandatory chain link 1, it's insanely good setup for some of the big guys, specifically Spia and Leon, um, which is one thing to keep in mind. This one negates. It's pretty bad for the most part because it's mandatory chain link 1, but generally it's just there to trigger as chain link 1, which is the most important effect. This one has another pretty relevant effect, which is the hand loop. This one is the one that is generally going to be set first. If you open a lot of names, you'll see people set the red one because it triggers if your opponent activates a monster effect in the hand. So a lot of the times, if they open a lot of little names, they'll set this, and then if you chain like Ash or change rule, they get to flip this and search. So generally speaking, this is usually the first one that they'll set if they're going to set something while they're searching. I played 2 of the new one, Expeditia. This one's easily the worst one because it only triggers if your opponent activates an effect that would set a spell or trap, which only triggers off of Draco Tail effects and branded cards, specifically Albion and Thrust, I guess. But everything else it's doing nothing on. But it's there because you need names for searching and you need consistency. Big guys, a Tori Mar is the obvious one. This is just an Omni Negate. But key thing is it only triggers for card effects on field, which means you can draw them, you can activate cards in grave, you can Veiler or Chain Ash, and this can't flip, which is very important for playing into the Atorimar, especially when they go second and start setting things before they start playing. Usually because it's pretty obvious it's going to be either a Torimar or the next one, the Spia. This card is New and Blazing Dominion. It says if you activate a card as Chain Link 3 or higher, if your opponent activates a card as Chain Link 3 or higher, you flip it and negate everything in the chain. A lot of Cool Tune players will go Chainlink 1 Rotary or Chainlink 1 Q and then Chainlink 2 Rotary and then Chainlink 3 Trackmaker and just auto lose on the spot because this flips, stops their searches, stops the top deck stacking, and they lose the body with the Trackmaker. Uh, so a lot of the times, if you want to like just get this off the board or slowly kind of pick apart the board if you're playing into the board, especially as Cool Tune, you want to use a removal effect as Chainlink 1, and you want to use any effect that doesn't trigger the Enneacraft cards as Chainlink 2. So like you can't really get around dodging something like the Grave effect of the green one, but you can go like Chainlink 1, like Rico pop like a spell trap, or like mix pop a spell trap, and then Chainlink 2 like Q, or Chainlink 2 Rotary, or Chainlink 2 Clip. And that's usually like a great way to kind of get started on clearing the bodies, just because you don't want to flip the guys just because they will basically just make your life infinitely harder. And if you can't clear the board, a lot of the times you will just lose on the spot. Uh, so there's that. And then this one is the best for going second, Leon. It triggers if you activate any card in response to an Enneacraft card. So if you're worried, if you, for example, see this as Cool Tune, and I start trying to play and I have this set, or you suspect I have it set, and I have a monster on my pen scale, one thing you can do is instead of trying to chain things to stop the pen scales from searching, you can on an open game state try clearing the pen scales or negating them instead, because that way you don't have to contend with the threat of this bouncing 3 cards non-target, which is insane for especially when it's going second. 2 ofs, 2 Pixia, 2 Archtail. These two are really bad, to be honest with you. Well, Pixie is really strong because it triggers if your opponent targets anything you control, but these two only trigger when that thing is the most recent thing in the chain, which is why chain blocking, especially with decks like Mitsu, and especially with decks like Draco Tail, and especially with decks like Cool Tune, is so important just to prevent these two from flipping, especially the Pixia, because the Pixie stops you from targeting anywhere, either whether on the field or in either player's graveyard, which comes up quite a bit, especially because most of your removal minus the Trackmaker is going to be non-target. Archer Tail is awful because it only triggers when a card effect would destroy a card on the field, but not optionally. So cards like Sky Striker Zero, for example, will not trigger Archtail, so you get to just pop cards for free. Cards like Urgula and Pan would have done that as well, but I suspect that there's going to be a lot less Draco Tail in the future. So it's for spells. 3 release because it's the consistency card. This has a Grave effect that is just follow up for the next turn. 3 Rebirth. This is the draw spell. The Grave effect is the more important part of this because when you normal or special summon a monster, you can banish it from the graveyard to either flip a face down Enneacraft monster face up, or special summon an Anycraft monster from your hand face down. A lot of the times, what people are going to do is they're going to have the Atori Mar, the whale, on their end board, and if you play into it, they can flip it whenever you normal or special summon a monster, and the Atorimar is going to book all of your monsters on flip, which is also why decks like Cool Tune have such a rough time into it, just because you trade a lot of the times like with like normal Q, for example, especially because it's so hard to kind of interact with just Chainlink 1 mandatory Atorimar effect. For the field spells, I played 2 of the field spell and 2 of the reset that gets the field spell. This is the better one to get off of the search, but the issue is that you don't want to play too many of the field spells because they start to clog your hand, especially going second. This has an insane grave effect, which is just if your opponent activates a card effect, you can banish it from the graveyard to flip monsters on your field face down, equal to the number of Anycraft pen monsters in your pen scales. This is extremely important for your targeted effects when you're trying to play into the board. I had multiple opponents try imperming or veiling while this was in graveyard, and you just chain this, reset your guy, so the imperm or veiler misses, or like even like cards like RS. And sometimes when that happens, you just kind of win, and like you're just wasting cards for no reason. Especially like because it's one of those cards that A lot of people do tend to forget just because they read the first part, which is just okay, place the field, and then it just it sits there, right? Uh, and then my non-engine, I just played Three Fallen and Virtuous. This card was okay. It's just a one for one kind of card. It's fine for going first, fine for going second. These days, you don't need floodgates with this deck to win the game when you're going first. You just set five, and a lot of times, as long as your opponent, especially if your opponent doesn't really know how to play into it, you will just kind of stun them out of the game a lot of the times, and like with your in-engine flip guys, and then just kind of burn them to death on the following turn. This deck doesn't kill very easily, thankfully. So a lot of the times, a lot of people that I know who actually know how the cards work, what they'll do is sometimes they'll just let me play, and they won't do anything on my turn because they're afraid of me flipping and getting my effects and getting my counters because my win con with the field spell only triggers if I get to start flipping guys, start burning with the field spell. So, for example, my round 5, I believe it was, my Sky Striker opponent, he did nothing on my turn, just let me play. Even though he went first, he passed on like set three plus 0, let me play my entire turn, and then on his turn, he starting to like pick apart my board instead of trying to play into the unknowns or the Atorimar, which is also only a negate on my turn and not my opponent's turn. So, for example, into that matchup, you especially don't want to give the Atorimar value because like on your turn it won't do anything. So, and for my side deck, I
So before
played.
before moving on to the side deck, so there's some general tips you've already given. So be careful of your chain links ordering. So we want the non-targeting effects to last because of the one guy will negate things that target or will respond to things that target. We want to keep things less than chain link 3, so don't get greedy with them. And then the one thing is you say we shouldn't clear much of the board. So if we're only going to clear some of the board, what's our priority in getting rid of monsters? How should we even approach that? Is battle phase fine? What other effects can we use to remove things? Some other tips are playing into the board.
So generally speaking, most of the cards are fine to kind of punch into. Uh, the exceptions being Pixia if you don't have any non-target removal, because if you punch into it and flip it, uh, but you can't like out it by battle. Like if you have like big guys, especially like things that are over 3,000, if you at least have an idea as to where the Atorimar is, for example, or you have a negate for the Atorimar, you can you can just beat it by setting up guys and then going to battle. But if you don't have big enough bodies to clear the 2,500 defense guys, it's very risky sometimes, especially if you're playing a deck like Cool Tune where your RS negates, for example, are in the main phase only. So like if you punch it to an Atorimar and you flip it, and they just flip your board, you will lose to that as well. But aside from the Atorimar, like punching into like Architail, for example, doesn't do anything because when it's flipped up, all it does is it just burns your opponent every time a monster goes to their grave. This one being if it's flipped up, your opponent can't target anything. Doesn't matter if you're just punching over it. Same with the Spia. Like it's a big guy, but the thing is like it's these these 7 don't actually do anything when they're flipped, other than their like floodgate effect. So like if you can put bodies that are big enough on the field and just go battle phase and start clearing them, it's so much easier to kind of like play into. Just because you no longer have to worry about like the crazy like flood effects. Same with like the little guys. The only one that's an exception would be, and the same with Leon as well, where Leon is just also another burn card when it's flip face up. So like just punching into it means that like you're just simplifying things a lot easier. Like these just pop a spell trap when they're flipped. This is the only one that's like real because it pops a monster on flip. Uh, Alazonea banishes a card from your opponent's hand when it's flipped, but generally speaking, like if you're already getting to a point where you can put the bodies on the board to start punching, this should already be face up. And if it's not face up, it's probably flip face down by reset, which means that you probably have a good idea as to where it is. And a lot of the times you will have a good idea as to where at least some of the cards are, just because you're always going to be activating the same guy over and over to keep setting things. And just keeping track of where they're being set, especially if they like keep activating it, and then as their last set, they set it. You know exactly where this one is now, so you don't have to play around that. Uh, like things like that kind of make it a lot easier to figure out what you're playing into and how to play into it, I guess. Like this one negates a monster on the field when it's flipped, but if you're attacking into it, it's not that big of a deal. Same with like the Grave Shuffle for decks like Cool Tune. Like the only thing that's gonna actually affect is like your RS attack, which can come up, especially when you're trying to clear the bigger bodies. But generally, I don't like the idea of using RS to clear bodies in battle into Cool Tune just because they can't RS negate during the battle phase. So it's very much, I think, to their detriment to leave an RS on the board when things like Zaylin would be a lot more useful, I think.
Okay. And then last question is just when you're trying to clear the board, what is your goal to keep a minimum follow up? So maybe you're trying to play it slow. What do you ideally, as the opposing player, want to leave the Enneacraft player with if you can't clear everything?
If you can't clear everything, clearing so generally in their one combo rotation, they burn for either 3,600 or 4,500. That's going to be either 4 or 5 searches. So if they get through their combo, generally speaking, they're only gonna have so many searches left on their next turn. So just clearing as many guys as possible is always good. Like clearing scales is also helpful. The field spell is always scary to a lot of people, but the thing that people don't realize is that the field spell doesn't do anything if you don't actually have scales that have counters. So clearing the scales will do is that it's doing double duty on both clearing their follow up because they have less searches now, but also clearing any counters that they might have accumulated on your turn so that they can't use the field spell, let's say on the crackback, to just burn you to death. One of my opponents did during the regional was that he had this like fixation on just clearing the field spell as much as possible. He popped it once, banished it another time, and because he let me keep the scales on board, they just kept getting counters. And then as soon as I finally got my field spell back up, it like I had more than enough counters to just burn him for like 12,000 damage in one turn. Um, Whereas like if he had focused on clearing the scales instead, he probably would have had much easier time because I would have a much bigger problem with generating enough he would get more turns because I would have to set more guys and then flip them on my next turn or flip them on his turn, start getting the counters to OTK. Because with 2 scales, you only need to flip 5 monsters total, which kind of sounds like a lot, but it's not that bad in this deck because you get to reset your guys and you can special summon guys from your hand face down, and attacking into face down monsters as well flips them, which gives your Enneacraft pen scales counters. But clearing the scales, especially, I think is like one of the bigger priorities. Releasing graveyard as well is like if you can just kind of if you have like an in-engine way to just clear cards in the graveyard, like clearing release is great because it keeps you off of like even more follow up. And then after that, like the yeah, I think that's what my priorities would be.
Yep. All right. Sounds good. We can continue with the side deck and the all important extra deck.
Yes. Side deck 3 the ball because you can't play Lava Golem in this deck since the special summon lock is in place. This also means that you don't have to play around anything in their extra deck the moment they activate any crap cards basically because they're locked. They can't special summon anything except face down. Uh, 3 Fua because combo decks are scary. I think this card was kind of like okay. Um, the anti-droll card, I didn't even care about this for like stopping grave effects. I just cared about the fact that you can't droll. This deck really gets hurt by droll. Uh, Sometimes it's like manageable if they open like a 5 monster hand and you like draw them on the first search. But the problem is that like if you draw them early, they don't have a way to guarantee the 5 monsters that they're or at least try to guarantee the 5 monsters they have set. And if you do it that way and have a deck that can kind of slowly pick apart the board, especially decks like Mitsu are really good into this, where if you draw Anycraft as Mitsu and then you just go like Murakumo 1 and a guy 2, you will always win the game on the spot just because they have no way to protect the board if Murakumo is not the most recent chain link. And as long as you don't play into Spider with your Mitsu chainlinks, for example, like the matchup should be like pretty free. Called by also for Droll. Uh, Two solemn accusations. Shout out Michael Tran for lending me these because I don't own these. This card was fine. I negated an engage. The life points don't matter that much because if you can retain your board, you will probably just kill your opponent on the crackback anyways, whether by battle or by just flipping your 5 guys and then end phase burning for, you know, a million damage. And then the funny card on my side deck was 3 cherries because you don't use your extra deck, which means you can kind of just put whatever in there. I've seen some people put just like utility links and utility XCs monsters. They will never come up. They don't matter. You won't special summon anything. If you do, something has gone horribly wrong. Like for example, if you somehow keep all your bodies, but you have no way to keep playing or search, then it might come up. But even then, it's like it's so shaky that it's not worth it to me, I think. And then side deck, one D mod, which I no longer have. Uh, I kind of threw it in there because I was just kind of brainstorming what I owned the night before the regional that I could use as like a Reaper target. 1/0, 1 Kagari, you play 2 because if you activate Reaper and they chain Kagari, you just Reaper only reveals on resolution. So if they summon Kagari, you Reaper the 0 on resolution, and if they summon the 0, you just Reaper the Kagari on resolution. This matchup is really bad for you because if your opponent knows what your cards do, they will play Lemon Gate control and just OTK you. So having a way to kind of cheese the matchup is really important. One Graflario because I couldn't find a Drastrius. One Wave King because Wave King beats this deck pretty hard since you just negate 2 of the summons and then whatever other interruptions you have, like probably will trade fine into like the much smaller hand now. One Liger Dancer because you don't have any ways to beat this unless you play Daruma Cannon, which I don't. One Crimson King because I saw a guy with a Red Dragon Archfiend deck. I don't know. I thought it was funny. One Access Code. This is the real Cherries target for Malice because you don't have any ways to interact with Access Code. One Cryptor. One SP. One of the DDD Link 2. I'm not sure if this is correct anymore, but it was the only one I owned. And you could kind of see like how little the extra deck matters because I'm just kind of throwing things in here. The important ones though for cherries are also the Trackmaker and the RS. The RS can also be Zaylin if you're afraid of them just negating your effects in hand to that activate the special summon from your hand face down. But I found that it's also funnier to just play the RS because you also can like banish their RSs and stop them from like using like an overtake, for example. At least for like Rico, you can still get mix, which is like fine, but it's like mix is like a lot like weirder, I think, to start with. But the big one is Trackmaker, just because it makes so many hands insanely awkward if they don't have Trackmaker. It like and their first action is like okay, normal like Rico grab Rotary, or like normal Q summon Rico grab Rotary. I had the only person I got to Reaper on Saturday when I Reapered him on normal Q ended on like Loudness War and had no way to get any of his effects to kind of trigger, which is really just awkward for that deck. So I like that a lot. And then my last 2 cards are 2 Albion. They should have been probably 3 Albion or like 2 Albion and an Ecclesia, but I don't own an Ecclesia. The third target would have come up one time because I played a Pure Mitsu player where I went through all 3, or at least got to the third Fallen and Virtuous, and it ended up just being like a Murakumo discard because I didn't have the target in my extra deck to send. Like you can probably cut, the D-mod spot or the any of these like random like joke ones. I think the only ones you actually need are like the striker ones for sure, the cool tune ones, and the Liger. Everything else I think is just flex.
Okay.
And that's the extra deck.
Any closing thoughts on this deck overall in the meta?
I think this deck is a lot worse. I think actually after the ban list, it had a solid Dracotail matchup. Now with the new Blazing Dominion cards, it already had a really good Cool Tune matchup. To be honest with you, it's like 8-2. maybe 7-3 if your opponent actually knows what they're doing. It's just such a rough matchup for them. But decks like Branded, for example, and any deck that can basically abuse non-target, non-destruction removal, like Mirror Jade, just absolutely blows his deck out of the water. Um, and decks like Branded being like popular into this coming format just makes this deck, I think, infinitely worse, especially because you can't play a lot of the cards that are like conventionally good into Branded. You can play like Lightning Storm, which I think I will do instead of these Fuas going forward, but it's just such a like a bad matchup that I don't think it's like particularly well positioned, but I don't. But as long as like Cool Tune remains like a popular deck, it's still like a very strong option. I think the biggest issue with this deck is actually the fact that all your combos and your OTKs or whatever, they take forever. And especially when you're trying to go second breaking board with engine, your games will take really, 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 really long. Like the more complex the boards, the longer it's going to take. But this deck, especially because you can never like OTK, right? Unless you have like some insane miracle where you have field up and you have the pen scales up and you start flipping and your opponent starts playing into it while you flip things. Um, and as a result, like most of your games will go to time. And before this tournament, and before I started playing Anycraft in general, I don't think I'd gone into time in maybe like 2 years. And I've played quite a few decks that generally do take a lot of time. But this deck has basically put me into time almost every other round, I want to say, like, or at least close to time, um, which I think is like a really big concern, just because like decks like Branded as well are also going to take forever. And a lot of these combo decks, like the Elf Node deck, are also going to take forever to do their combos and stuff. So I maybe it has to do with like me not scooping fast enough, but a lot of these games are very winnable, especially which is like crazy to say because you're just playing with engine most of the time. Um, but like the cards are very, very, very strong going second if your opponent is willing to play into them, which I think is the big thing. So I personally don't think I would play this at a YCS in the near future or Nats even, but I think it's like fine for like a regional or like a local level. And I think that's where I would leave this deck at.
Okay. Well, thanks for your profile and explanations. And make sure if you like this video, like and subscribe down below. And until next time, guys.